So we're going to talk for about 30 minutes or so about science and the future of communication, and then we'll have some questions at the end if there's some, you guys have some things to go through. But we're going to get stretchy for a minute. You guys good with that? And get kind of out of your comfort zone and go somewhere new. All right. So first, oh wait, now my remote was working a second ago. Let's see, there we go. All right. So I really want you to think about for a second. I want to make my remote talk to its adapter here. Hang on. Get this to work.
I think it was working.
Is that working? All right. I want you to think about. Come on. All right. What happens when you communicate? Literally. What's happening? What does it do to people? Well, you create awareness. When you communicate something, somebody didn't know something, and then they do, they become aware. We cause people to consider things, right? We cause people to think. What else is happening when we communicate? Words come out of my mouth, come out of yours. We can also see that we influence states of emotion and physical response. We know we affect thinking. We also know we affect the body, our hearts, things that cause us to feel, laugh, cry. All these things can happen just from communication, right? Is that all, or is there more though that's happening when we communicate? What the sciences say, what scripture says, is that we are creating reality. We aren't just throwing some words around. We are literally shaping matter when we communicate. Told you we're gonna get real stretchy here for a second, because I came to Pepperdine, I wanted to study psychological communication. I graduated a little while ago, we'll just say maybe a couple decades. And it wasn't a thing back then, and it drove me nuts that it wasn't a thing to understand how our words connect with psychology and behavior. How do we tune what we say based on that? But the thing is that behavior and psychology, those are just certain fields looking at what happens in us. If we really think about what the whole of the universe is, everything's science, everything's math. So what's really happening when we communicate is that we're participating in this bigger quantum dynamic than any of the fields study right now, right? But we, as deep thinkers, can look at what we do see from the science and make some really intelligent inference and make some decisions about how we want to work with some of that. Now, let me show you some proof that communication shapes matter. All right, see this joke here? It says a 74-year-old man uses his hairdryer to slow traffic near his home. Okay, look at that picture. Does that not look like a speed gun, you know, the kind of radar gun? So this is a silly example, a joke. I use jokes because they are far more memorable, as we'll talk about later. But it makes a profound point. It makes a very profound point if you will let it. He changed matter with this joke. Anybody use Waze? You know, people mark a location as a speed trap, and we're going to slow down there a lot, right? It isn't just that he stood out here with a blow dryer and a orange vest for a little while to have some fun. He changed reality. He created difference in his world. Instantaneously, people would slam on the brakes, they would do all these things, but he influenced change with a blow dryer form of nonverbal communication. So if a blow dryer nonverbal communication can change matter, have technology coded differently about a neighborhood, all those types of things, what are your words doing? And how do we involve ourselves with that? I think the first and most important thing for anybody in PR communication to really anchor yourself in is knowing that communication is change. Truly. You aren't just putting things out there to kind of be out there. You're changing people and you're changing yourself with your words. So if you hear nothing else I say today, hear this most of all. Be careful. Be intentional. with the words you speak to yourself first. Really. There's so much I was saying to myself before I understood the science that I thought was maybe a good, tough heart on myself, inner critic kind of thing. Any of that toxic, hard on ourselves language, really, before we talk about marketing and all of this PR things, you're talking to yourself all day. So I want you to think about the things I'm talking about here and how you tune your inner dialogue and how you talk to yourself to not just how we influence people externally and with PR. Because communication really is change. And we have a short amount of time, so I'm not going to show you all the professional marketing, PR measurement organizations that talk about specifically we're measuring changes in perceptions, attitudes, behaviors, all these kinds of things. Just sit with me though, it's change all the time. And change is easy and natural. It's the normal flow of things, whether it's big or little, everything's a state of change. Like the example of if I order a package from Amazon and it gets delivered to my doorstep and I go out and I pick up that package, I'm changed. I'm now a person holding a package, and I wasn't a person holding a package before. It's not that I'm changed to some phenomenally different state, but there's all this little iterative, natural change that takes us to a different state. And that's what you're doing. You're not just marketing communicators. You're not just public relations professionals. When you graduate with these degrees and you go into the world, you are change agents. You are shaping reality on the behalf of companies, on the behalf of whom. And your responsibility is not just to go in there and say, I'm just here to pump out whatever communication you want me to, but it's to know that you are changing people with these words and understand, how do I want to organize those messages? How do I help my company as well as the world understand the power of what we are doing when we communicate? Now, I really want to keep things kind of light when I talk about sciences today, really kind of light, but I want to show you a few stretchy, complicated things too. So we really looked at, as Dr. O said, we look a lot at and have been studying for a long time the behavioral and the cognitive sciences, and what those fields teach us we can do to tune different parts of communication to make them more effective. And at Volume PR and Engagement Science Lab, we apply a lot of those insights, and have been for 22 years, on if I tweak a pitch, or if I launch this company with these things versus these things, what are the outcomes like? What gets us maximum amount of outcomes? But now we've been really focused on also looking at the quantum sciences, the physical and natural sciences, and what do they have to teach us? And I want to show you something here. When I say communication is change and that it forms and shapes reality, again, I'm trying to stay light, but I want you to think about a few concepts and watch this video real quick around the fact that we can see in science how sound, the invisible things coming out of my mouth right now, have provable mass that shapes matter. So the frequency coming out of my mouth and into your body literally shapes your matter. At a quantum level, everything is a vibrating wave or particle, everything, okay? Even at the base of each individual DNA helix in us has a vibrating base, actually a number of letters that we can tune as well to musical notes on a piano, and you can play human DNA like a song. Our bodies, everyone we're speaking to, are soundboards, God's magnificent soundboards we don't understand how to work with yet, as much as our magnificent creator has made it possible for us to use. Now, what you're seeing is when we take sound waves and we tune them to very specific frequencies, that's what those little hertz numbers are, they form what are called, there's a field called sacred geometry, looks at these geometric patterns that occur in nature and occur in various places, and that there's this sacred divine origin to these. It doesn't seem right, but it's just totally random. And what's so fascinating is the more that we tune to all these different frequencies, this is a sound plate with sand on it, right? And showing you how, as it's tuned to these different frequencies, the types of shapes that this creates. Tuned to specific frequencies, this is the way that these different sound waves orient themselves. I didn't put this slide in here today, but I have another image that looks really similar to this, except the background is beige And the front is red because it's heart tissue. Scientists at Stanford now using this type of science to form new heart tissue and create new cell structure in the body. We are at an age where now medicine and science are starting to realize sound heals us and sound harms us. The way we word things, the music we listen to, these things actually do create and shift our reality. Now, let's look for a second at what we call kind of the science of communication at a macro level, right? You're in school studying communication, you're focused kind of up here, right? It's in the social sciences where we look at communication, psychology, behavior, some of these other things I'm talking about are what influence us. But really, this is the entirety of the science of communication, right? We live in a unified world where the physical matter, physical sciences, structure, everything that our bodies are really doing. And I want you to look at some of these words. If you like the stuff I'm talking about, go search terms like epigenetics and psychoneuroimmunology. These are the fields where the medical scientists and doctors are noting that the stuff we thought before, like when I went to school here, the things we thought about what formed our genes and that our genes dictated and determined what our life was going to be, epigenetics and psychoneuroimmunology have proven not accurate. We are shaped more by our environment. So for example, I have an autoimmune disorder and I was told my whole life, it's because my mom had it and her mom had it and her mom had it. But you know what else? We share behaviors. We shared eating patterns. We shared a lot of the same words. And since I've learned all this and made some changes in my life, I've reversed my autoimmune condition more than 75%. Maybe I wouldn't have got it in the first place. So I don't want to be thinking in these deterministic ruts that just whatever happened to my genes, that's what's going to happen to me now. You decide how your genes express. In a large form, we are beginning to understand how we can involve ourselves in that. And what psychoneuroimmunology talks about, search that one on YouTube, and Dr. Gabor Mate has some phenomenal research on this of truly when we look at the progression of different diseases, especially those in autoimmune conditions, how they are formed by our environment. And our environment is shaped by communication. In large part, this is what you're really doing. You are so powerful. I'm not here just to give you like pump-up speech. You didn't pay me, I swear. I'm really here because I want you to get, you're not doing anything small when you're communicating. It is truly shaping and forming reality. So I just want to give you a couple quick examples. You know, what are some of the things that we know from the behavioral sciences and the cognitive sciences that we see as more of a clue into what is the inner working of what we call resonance. What communication methods can you use that will create a greater state of resonance in your audience? And I want to invite you that as you look at in your careers, because whether you study it here or when you're out into your profession and your jobs, if you're in professional communication, marketing, and PR, there's a tidal wave coming right now to start to integrate the behavioral and social sciences into professional communication. And it's being done in a very pioneerish, we just discovered America sort of way. Like we don't know what we don't know, so we're just steaming in and all excited to use all these different tools and techniques in front of us. And what I want to plant as a seed in all of your minds today is to understand there's all these different dynamics at play. And do I just want to grab something that works really well and use it because it works? Or do I want to understand why it's working? And look at the bigger stage of how I tune understanding into you. And what am I doing when I use certain frequencies or certain techniques? What kind of resonance am I creating? So for example, contrast. We know that contrast accelerates meaning. Whenever we contrast to with or without or for or against or different things, especially in words or in imagery, and show people that real clear distinction, it's so much easier to understand. Whenever we use humor, it deepens memory. You're more likely to remember funny examples that I show you rather than very intellectual and serious and specific kinds of examples, right? So the imperative that it creates for us in communication know that as you get into the field too, there will be a continuous opportunity for you to learn these behavioral and social little keys, if you will. I was talking to Dr. O earlier today, and I said, have any of you seen the movie Inside Out? Kid movie, they make me watch it a lot. You like that movie? It's like when you're communicating, it's like you've got that big control panel, just like all the little emotions have the control panel, right? And they're pushing different buttons. You're pushing buttons in people. When we communicate, we're pushing all these buttons and we are controlling people. We don't tend to think of ourselves as that powerful, that involved, but we ethically should consider some of those elements because that is what's happening. We now understand from the science, it really is what's going on. So the imperative is to involve ourselves in these considerations. And my invitation to you is to consider yourselves leaders in these considerations. Because guess what? Unless they've taken some classes with me, there are very few people in the world of professional communication that have thought about any of this. They are just kids in the candy store saying, oh, look, there's a new book on behavioral marketing, behavioral communication and marketing. What can I do? And it's just indexing. Look at this shiny thing and how it makes this change. And this shiny thing makes this change. Like the big control panel, though we don't know any of the pluses or minuses. We just know how we can push a buy button in your brain, make you get scared so you run faster to purchase something, make you feel like there's not enough time, so you better hurry, right? There's so many different ways and things that we can make people feel and create the change that we want as marketing communication and as public relations professionals. We are here to change. Stay focused on that point. That is what we're doing. Be clear how big your power is, and then how do we tune that? How do we influence for light rather than dark? What does dark look like? Has anybody seen The Social Dilemma? So this stuff I'm talking to you about, the behavioral and cognitive side of it, it was discovered. And then the first people to learn from it were the people who code social media in Silicon Valley. And so they used it to code addiction. Anybody have a little bit of issue with social media addiction? I'm raising my hand because I do. not to judge, because it is designed to do that. They understand all the little things I'm talking about, and they've got the control panel of you, and they are dialing it up so that you are addicted, so that you feel all the types of emotions that they know keep you there longer. They know that if they make you feel a little shame and not as good about yourself, that you're going to seek deeper and you're going to keep researching. So that big control panel with everything, they see everything as equal. It's all the same. It's just things that we do to make communication more effective. So they've gone to the ones that are the most effective and they're pushing them like, yay, we found the button that makes him buy. And we're going to push the buy button 9,000 times a day. But what they haven't thought, because they haven't seen it in a bigger system, is that that's in remember the 4 characters, right? In Inside Out, that's in the category of if there was a character called shame. And if there was a character called mental illness, that is where those buttons live and the effect that they have over time. They have profound mental health consequences, not just a little. I want to invite you to go on the web, on Pepperdine's website, and the President Speaker Series last year, Dr. Gash had Dr. Jonathan Haidt from NYU come out to talk about free speech and the academy, is what they have here on the website. But in the talk, he talks about how do we restore civil discourse? How do we change the way we talk to each other so it's nicer, so it's collaborative, so that we can cooperate and accomplish change from that cooperative place rather than a place of coercion and force? How do we get there? And what's fascinating, I really think that you in particular would enjoy from this talk, he summarizes and shows some of this research around what changed in social media while you were all of the ages of folks in this room growing up and starting to experience social media, and what changes it has had on national mental health since 2005 with Gen Z. So really watch this if you have time and are interested in this, to see what are the implications of everything I just showed you a minute ago, tuning everything to the fear, the shame, the things that we in a scientific space know to be more in the psychological trauma category. What effect does that have? And it's not positive. It's not good. It's quite likely it is one of the predominant forces contributing to a decline in mental health. The reason I really want you to think about these and involve yourself in this more than you may think is important is because one term I want to give you here. Has anyone heard of the concept of sympathetic resonance? So we were just in Clyde's office and I was talking to him about this and my kids asked what it is. And I thought, all right, I have to explain this to my kids. So we're going to explain it the way we did there. See if it plays. Okay, so you guys know what these are? These are metronomes. So if you play music, you know a metronome, I set it to what I want and it keeps that time. It doesn't sing from that time, right? But metronomes are what we call oscillating machines. All of your bodies are an oscillating machine. Okay? Read them out. An oscillating machines tune to the same frequency. So here how the sound is the same. The frequency of it is exactly the same. Now, these things are supposed to hold their own measured time. They do not change, right? They hold their own measured time. That's the whole purpose of a metronome. But what science shows us is we tune oscillating machines tuned to the same frequency. A phenomenon known as sympathetic resonance happens, where they are all going to come into harmony with each other. This video plays for 5 minutes. I don't know if I can speed it up here, but what starts to happen is you hear how divided all of these are. Let me exit for a second so I can jump ahead and play for you guys a little further. I think I can anyway. I want you to hear it a little further along. Hear what happens? What happens on the screen? I don't have the other one plugged in anymore.
Oh, you don't? Yeah.
Oh, it's because I put it in a display thing. That's okay. All right, let me just do it here so it's not on the screen, but do you guys hear it? I want you to hear what happens. Just listen to the sound. Okay, so we heard how apart they are. Total mess.
Wonderful.
Within a few minutes. That's what happens after 3.5 minutes, okay? Of these things that are supposed to keep their own time, be fully separate, achieving what we call, and what I want you to understand as sympathetic resonance. What we send out, we create in others. Even when we're supposed to be our own little keepers of time, our own little instruments of measurement that are impervious to that kind of influence, it still happens. This is the science of universal matter and how structure is formed. So what happens when we are constantly tuning everything to fear, pain, rush, and limit? I propose if you go into marketing, go into public relations, you're gonna have to learn how to message a company. And in most companies today, most organizations train around the way that we create a message is we identify the pain in our audience, and then we talk about our gains. But that means we are tuning everything then to pain. Think about a SWOT analysis. 50% of a SWOT analysis, we have strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Weaknesses and threats, we're thinking about where are we weak? What if it was what are our internal opportunities for growth? You get a completely different answer to the question if you vibe it out, you ask it from a weakness place versus the internal opportunities for growth. You can going into new organizations as you graduate with these degrees, it's important you bring those types of considerations to the table. Because right now, so much of the world is just hyper pushing these buttons and not realizing that there's any negative outcomes to it. Whereas if we consider things from a resonant communication perspective, what we are doing here is you see these different fields: comprehension, consideration, connection, motivation, and memory. Where we're taking all of these different buttons and organizing that control panel to understand how I can influence memory in you, but not be doing it from a place that is psychologically harmful. And not doing these things from a place that creates internal division and agony and pain as to why you go and take an action and make a choice. There are so many examples. One that I think will probably sear into your minds as much as I don't like to share it. I'm actually going to real quickly. So I always share this one about my kids. Now, I imagine most of you aren't parents yet. So imagine you got a kid and you got to teach them that fire is hot and not to touch fire, right? And so if we are acting like the behavioral science folks, a lot of them right now, where just everything's cool, what they're doing, and what would be the effect of me doing here with my kids is if I came running in and said to you, oh my gosh, I've been trying to teach my kid that fire is hot and not to touch it. And like the most amazing thing that's happened, I thought to myself, no, it's gonna get really real if I stuck their hand in the fire, like melted off the whole first couple layers of skin, you know, it's all bubbly and whatever. And they totally get it now. They get the fire. They're not it. Okay, smarty. No, I'm a monster if I do that. Right? We have perspective and ethics and all of these things to make that really obvious. In another 20 years, the things that we are doing that are causing that in our mind will be far more obvious. And you don't want to be the communicator who's won all these great awards because you essentially lit your audience on fire. So I really want to challenge you as you go into this world, as you're thinking about communication, are you attuning your engagement for harm? Or how do we attune more directly to achieve states of harmony? Because it is the power that you all hold in what you're doing. So thanks for letting me come in and share this quick science of communication view. And I don't know if we have any time for questions today, but
Well, we can take a couple.
yeah,
Yes.
if we have a.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. So I mean, this is a deep stuff, right? It's very advanced, but one thing that I can say for sure is whenever I hear Elizabeth talk, for me who's been in the field and have thought about this, right? Like not think about these terms because I didn't know they exist, right? But whenever I had a hunch or, hey, this is gonna work, this is gonna be able to persuade someone, and if I am editing or approving someone's idea, those little hunches that I have, they actually come from this and it's happening in my head. I just didn't know it, right? So that's why I'm always fascinated when I hear this. And thank you so much for the work that you do. Do you guys have any questions? Curious.
I was just like wondering, like, what did you change in your life in order to improve your, is it
Autoimmune disease? Yes. Well, first I stopped calling it a disease. I started calling it a condition. I realize now that my inner dialogue was very toxic. I thought it was the hard on you coach. You know, it's like, come on, girl, quit doing this, get over here and do this. And as I started to understand the importance of all this language, I realized I was talking crap to myself. I was beating myself up. It was very toxic. So now there's I think a really balance. I try to understand the difference between, anybody heard the term toxic positivity, right? Sometimes if we're just positive about everything, that's toxic positivity versus what I call high frequency communication. So it's not here to just pretend everything is sunshine and roses and it's great. But it is when I'm speaking to myself, I don't speak rudely anymore. I speak from a high frequency place. So it is never like, oh, you're such an idiot. Why did you do that again? Chocolate again? Like, we know we're not supposed to do this. I don't talk to myself that way. I give myself much more grace, much more space to be learning, and try to encourage rather than shame. So much of what we're actually doing comes from a place of shame. And when I tell people that, they're like, oh, no, shame isn't relative to my will. And then we get deeper into things and they're like, oh yeah, that's what that word means. And it is what's really happening. So think about the energy of where your inner dialogue is coming from. Am I shaming myself, making myself wrong, rather than recognizing myself as a journeyer, as a student, as someone who's learning? And some of us have to make mistakes. Most of us have to make mistakes to learn. So it's not about beating ourselves up from that. But the other thing I did to answer you too is if you want, I can show you, I can send a link to Dr. O to share with you, is that I made some food changes as well that maybe it was 115 pounds in 10 months. And that combined with all this had a really, really big effect. So if you really want to know more on the autoimmune side, it's called Autoimmune Protocol, AIP. Anybody with autoimmune conditions, you really want to look into the AIP through science. That is quite profound. We change the frequency of the food that builds our body as well as the words that build our body, those two things together really transform how.
Do you think it can help with like, if you have like cancer or like diabetes or like those other like health problems in your family, do you think it can help like fight against that?
Yes. Yes.
My goodness. They hear a lot of things in our house and we watch a lot of videos and things. So they see some of the things that we watch that are about what scientists are doing to try to change people with sound waves. So like on the Today Show a couple weeks ago, it was in August, you can even watch it on the Today Show website. They're showing like people with Parkinson's and different diseases that can't even play the piano or write anymore. They put them into vibration and sound wave exposure machines and such, and they have no tremors when they come out and they can fully function again. We are at the, if this is the history of hearing, right, and understanding stuff, we're like here and understanding a lot of these dynamics. So it very much is in play, but the degree to which is still really being understood. But I and my kids, like we don't listen to the news in the morning anymore, as much as I want to. I put on high frequency, good praise and worship music or different kinds of songs, and you can just see the difference in our home. It's night and day difference in how we talk to each other and engage. And that's what's forming.
I find it hard to get like other people to break out of their routines, get on board this type, because obviously, you know, it's not going to be like the easiest change in people's lives to just sort of go from the one-way routine to sort of flipping over and kind of open.
Absolutely. So one of the things we know in all of this work is that there's something called backfire. We can communicate in certain ways and we think it's going to do a certain thing and then it causes this thing called backfire. And there's 6 forms that we teach how to tune to be in harmony with rather than to have the backfire happen. And one of them is called worldview extreme. If you come in and you blow up people's understanding of the world too much, they'll walk away overwhelmed and not participate. So a lot of times when we're teaching other professionals, we're just giving them a couple little keys. Like contrast, look at how much contrast works to increase understanding and start to incorporate a few of those things into their work. And then we slowly layer on this other thinking and getting to the elements of harm. I took you guys right to the heart, right away in 30 minutes, no less, usually like 2 hours before we get to this point in nice, soft understanding of science. So you're smart in seeing that though. There is going to be resistance, but for the most part, I think it's exciting when we think about first, so we communicate with ourselves, because we are all very egoic beings. So when you're talking to somebody about it, begin like I did today. It's forming you, not just about the outcome of your work. It's what it's doing in you and your family, in your whole world that way. And then they're more likely to see the benefit in participation.
I took note of the book and speech by Jonathan Haidt. Is there any other literature that you recommend if you want to learn more about?
Oh, so much. What I want to tell you most of all though is, wait a minute, and my book should be done in the next year or so. Working hard on that. It's a lot with those two running around all the time now. So we'll see about that timeline. But most of the things now, what you could find are things in the behavioral sciences that are just going to say like, look at this shiny object, and they're showing you the shiny objects and how to use them. None of this ethical and quantum perspective I'm talking about is in books yet that I've seen anywhere. You can learn a lot on YouTube though, searching some of these terms, and most of that is there. If you want to go to YouTube for Engagement Science Lab, our company, there's I think about 4 or 5 hours of some of my talks explaining some of these in longer formats. I just did a workshop at the Southern Public Relations Federation conference in Alabama a few weeks ago, and we recorded and put those up there. There are a whole workshop on how you work with resonant communication. How do you start to apply some of these things in more detailed ways? So I'd say look at videos like that and then search behavioral science and communication or any of those types of contents and look at them, but you have to be your own filter of the ethical elements. And you know, Clive really understands that as well. I think we're going to be seeing more and more of that in conversation here.
Why do you think it took us so long? Now,
Easy question. So have you ever heard the word hyper object? So Timothy Morton heard the word hyperobjects, a great book, if you want to read that book too, about how there's these objects in the world that are so big, they evade public sense making. They're too big for us to make sense of, because this object, like, let's imagine this is a hyperobject in the middle of this void, right? So physics studies it, and neuroscience studies it, and behavioral sciences study it, and political science studies it, and economists study it, right? All these people from their own siloed bases of expertise with really smart perspectives, but they only know what they know. And there's no one place truly capable of integrating all of that into one consideration. I've been an active member of PRSA for years, I was the chair of the technology section for a couple of years. Our associations are great, but they cannot manage the hyperobject of something. They can't set the new ethical standards for these. What we need is to bring more awareness, as the hyperobject research is doing, to other areas of hyperobjectivity, and creating think tanks and groups, and they are starting to be out there. This kind of thing excites you. Search for think tanks and innovators and places like that to look for jobs in the future, because those are the folks starting to say, how do I bring together all these different sciences into one view of how we solve this? Like, communication is arguably one of the largest hyperobjects there is. Climate change, systemic injustice, poverty, these are all like hyperobject type of things. And you're at an advantage just knowing that word, just knowing that that is the dynamic of the universe in which you're working. So, great question.
One last one and then we'll wrap up.
So like, as like a future like PR communications, like advertising professional, like what questions would you ask yourself if like I were to come to you and be like, here's my company, like I want you to make a PR campaign, like what would I like ask myself when making like the media that's going to be sent out to like these kind of things in it? That makes sense.
So, how do you create a message informed with these principles? What you're saying? Good. No, it's okay. Just, I think the same way. So it's not a super short answer, but the fastest way I can give you that is don't use SWOT analysis, use noise analysis. And then really think about and define your awareness goals. Usually when people create goals, it's just the goals of I want to affect this metric in the company. And I want to have this kind of open rate. Or I want you to think about and specifically map what changes in perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors you are there to create. So the noise analysis, the perception, attitude, behavior goal area. And then we have a framework. If you want to email me, I can send you some of the deeper materials of some of the things like that we train on, where we show the formula for how we create what we call a meta message. What we've always done in our agency to create that macro message, and a certain formula that we workshop our clients through to come up with what we call an internal positioning statement. A big, who are you? Not thinking about it for outside world voices, but just who are we? And then we teach that image that I showed you a moment ago of all the different resonance fields, how to then select which elements from here matter to tune that meta concept into the most resonant message. It's not a super fast process.
Yeah.
But the key, has anyone seen the TV show The Irrational? Just came out a couple weeks ago on NBC. Watch this show, it's so cool. It's the first show about a behavioral scientist. And it's for like legal perspective and how the behavioral scientists, doing things in law and whatnot. But you'll hear them constantly bring up different little things like this, as he's saying, analyzing the situation and teaching people that. That's who you want to be, I think, in the future. If you really want to be a successful communications professional, a lot of where things are going is for you to be able to drop in and say, well, the choice architecture of this is off. Just because you know what choice architecture is. And you know that you are a choice architect, by the way, too. You can put that all on your business cards of how do I structure the information so I am walking people through choices in the right way. And I'm excited for you guys. You are entering a very important field at a very exciting time. The world's starting to wake up to this. And people that have been out here for generations or decades, they don't know it any more than you do. So you can become in a place of leadership and powerful influence because you're bringing these types of considerations in a way that I think even when I first entered the workforce, I couldn't have that kind of influence right away. There was a difference in knowledge for me to share with my senior leaders. So I'd really encourage you to come in with that kind of consideration of, hey, it's not just this overall panel. We really want to learn what all the buttons mean and learn what's really happening when we push those buttons. So we don't just hyper push scarcity and fear, and we don't use these things in a way that causes negative outcomes.
I mean, this is golden because the internal position statements and papers, those cannot be more critical in today's world where your mission and vision and identity stands for the kind of communication that you do. Like when I go back to think about it, if I'm listening to pitches, I've always picked agencies that had their own version of an internal, this is who you are, this is who you ought to be. I just didn't know that I was going through this process. And that's what I'm saying is everything that I've done, like Elizabeth puts into like an exact science, and this is great. And what Sam asked about, hey, how come we haven't done this before? One version of an answer that I might have is because it worked without thinking about all this. But with AI and, big data and stuff like that, accessible and being around, it becomes important because only then you can make the right choices, ethically right, morally right, professionally right choices. So thank you once again.
Thank you guys
And
for having us.
I'll be sure to share.
So let's take 5